Hello, we're back. It's GPS Live for January 19th, 2024, and it's Jonathan and me, and we're doing the thing again. I'm a little sleepy today, so I'm trying to get my energy up.
That's okay. Out in your neck of the woods, it is still morning. Over here on the East Coast, we are finishing our lunch.
I have somehow today it was the coffee that I normally drink. Like, I don't know if I drank it at the wrong time or something, but I drank it and now I'm sleepier than I was before. Or maybe it's just too warm in my house. But none of that matters because we're here for GPS Live. With some great stories that we have found for you. Jonathan, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing quite well. It's that time of the year when you need to forecast what what your sales and what your growth and what your all of your experiences are going to look like for the rest of the year. So, side of the house that not many people get to see, but my 2024 is going to be cool. That's all I gotta say. Super cool, awesome. How about you, Tristan?
Well, things are going great. Hazel's decided that she just wants to be part of the show
Welcome.
this time, so we'll allow that. Nope, good girl. I love you too. Things are going pretty well over here. We actually are coming up on the great annual report. The GuidePoint Research and Intelligence Team annual report will be coming out next week, so we're doing a lot of work on that and working with that team to get that out. So keep an eye out for that. Also, if you are joining us live, thank you so much. Go ahead and let us know where you're coming in from. If you are watching this on demand, we still would love to hear from you. And thank you so much for giving us some of your time. But we need to jump in because we've got quite a few stories this week to cover. But before we do, the views and opinions that Jonathan and I express are our own. And do not necessarily reflect the official views or opinions of GuidePoint Security. We're just a couple of guys talking about cybersecurity stuff. So that being said, our first story this week is about a piece of malware called AndroXGhost, or AndroXGhost. One of the two. They have built out a botnet to increase the impact that they can have across different organizations and finding new victims. So, Jonathan, how's this work? What's the botnet that they've built out? What's that accomplishing?
Well, let's real quickly talk about what exactly is a botnet and what it's capable of. Consider it this way: bot and net. So bot comes from robot, implying that whatever computer this malware is on is basically, operating under the instruction of somebody else, not the, owner of the hardware. And net implying network. And so this is going to be a massive network of systems across the internet that have kind of fallen victim to these adversaries and are essentially just waiting for their commands to do nasty and nefarious things. And so what's happening is this botnet can be used to target and exploit vulnerable networks. Sadly, a lot of these targets are things that probably could have been patched by now, right? There's a number of vulnerabilities that are being used that what did they say? Set up to 7 years old?
It's up to 7 years old. So what this is actually doing is the malware itself and the botnet is crawling around looking for websites built on the Laravel web application framework to find .env files that are exposed, right? So it crawls around to these crawls around the web looking for these sites. When it finds one that's built on Laravel web application framework, it just starts kind of recursively going through the directory of that site, looking for any kind of root level .env files that might be exposed, containing any credentials to access any additional services. The exploit that they are using specifically was discovered in 2018. And was that same day CISA put it on their known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. So it wasn't just, hey, we found this vulnerability and it's something you should be aware of. It's we found this vulnerability and we know it is being used already. So going back as far as 2018, this vulnerability is out there, and the AndroXGhost malware and the botnet that they've built out is operating here in 2024. So we're looking at least, right, a 5-year-old vulnerability there being exploited. But it can also exploit several other vulnerabilities and functionalities of things like SMTP, and then a PHP arbitrary code execution flaw from 2017, and an Apache HTTP server path traversal attack vulnerability from 2021. So anywhere from 3 to 7 years old now, these vulnerabilities are being exploited by this piece of malware to gain access to resources and environments and cloud environments outside, just by finding these small vulnerabilities that could have been patched a long time ago.
So to give some context here, ENV files are often used to store all different types of what we call key value pairs of bits of information that can be found to share for things like containers or different types of environments. And ENV literally stands for environment.
Yeah.
And so the data in these sometimes can be useful. It may contain credentials, it may contain keys, it may contain session information. And then that information can be directly used to pivot, expand, and exploit further in the system. Now, you did mention a couple of vulnerabilities there between PHP, so targeting applications and websites that are built on PHP, and also Apache path traversal, so targeting websites that utilize Apache as their main background framework, and path traversals to access other files on the system, not just the ones that are part of the website itself. And so it just goes to show that things that have been out there for a while, are still actively being exploited because there are a number of organizations that are not fully patched, right? These
Yeah.
unpatched systems, when they're announced years and years ago, are being forgotten about or being missed, and they are still being targeted to be exploited to this day.
Yeah.
So really, staying up to date on what all of your systems are running, what is being exposed to the internet, and making sure that you're appropriately monitoring and getting those systems patched and up to date, so things like this don't happen to you. Because again, these botnets, all they're doing is just scanning and traversing and running around looking for systems that are vulnerable, and pretty much automating a lot of the process by saying, oh, look, you meet the criteria of a potentially vulnerable system. Let me go ahead and attack and escalate and make you part of my little band of merry hacking robots.
Well, it also, I think, highlights there's, within cybersecurity, an interesting thing that always occurs, right, is like the article that we're looking at here, right, that's on SC Media or SC Magazine. Right, they highlight like some of the folks that they talked to said, oh, it's always important there's a non-zero number of people who will just always leave these systems out there and unpatched. The cloud is not inherently secure, right? But then you start really exploring and thinking about what those knock-on effects are after that, right? So even if you have just one person who never patched these vulnerabilities, and so it's used to exploit them, right? Are they a third-party vendor for someone else? Right, you start looking into like how far does the impact and reach of one organization having exposed credentials and security credentials and vulnerabilities, right? How far does that one organization's reach go once you get into some cloud environment that they have access to or that they are pulling from, and then that gives you knock-on effect from that island hopping from one organization to the next, and so you can finally get to your end goal. So it is incredibly important, especially as we enter this kind of new era of regulation and laws being passed about cybersecurity and the impacts that attacks can have, and who is responsible for those. Right, it's more important than ever to be thinking about the fact that like one small slip on your organization's behalf, right, down the road could be really, really impactful for someone else. And if you can be held liable for that, that's just not going to be good for your organization. That would definitely lead to one of those SEC 8K filings for sure.
Which we see a lot of these days. In fact, we'll talk about them a little bit later in the show.
A little bit later in the show. But speaking of vulnerabilities and flaws that that could be patched, right, and maybe old, let's take a turn and talk about vulnerabilities that were just discovered and are immediately patched as we move to talk about GitHub mitigating the vulnerabilities that were discovered in December that would allow for credential exposure, taking steps immediately to mitigate the impact of those vulnerabilities by rotating security keys within their applications. You know much more about this, Jonathan, than I do. You were talking before the show in much more detail about what is actually going on here, and we were kind of trying to explore it and suss it out a little bit. But let me see if I can get it right this first time. Right, so GitHub has rotated the keys for not only their site but also for they're recommending for GitHub enterprise server versions. They're rotating the security keys and encouraging customers to always be pulling down the most recent configurations through the API so that they can get those new security keys and get updated. Because there was a vulnerability discovered in December that would allow someone with the organization owner role, and this is important, we'll talk about it in a second, but someone with the organization owner role to get in and fiddle around, right, with the actual settings and environment variables of a GitHub instance. And this is where it got really interesting, though, is that it requires the organization owner role, which there should only be, right, one person for, or a very small handful of people who could be given that level of permission.
So yeah, it's an interesting one, and like you said, we were kind of reading between the lines to make sure we fully understood this.
Yeah.
But the basis of what's happening here is that, similar to the previous story, in a strange manner, we didn't even plan it that way. Publicly accessible environment variables of production containers, env files in a similar nature, but this time a GitHub version thereof, may include credentials, and because those are exposed through this particular vulnerability that, again, is, like you said, brand new, that could allow you to see information that could be utilized to take it a step further and target a system or target containers directly from what you find within those environment variables. Now, one of the things that we did mention or find is that there's actually two vulnerabilities that are taking place here. The main one is with regards to the environment variable exposure. Again, these could potentially contain credentials or other useful information for an adversary to continue their attack.
Right.
But the other one is a little bit different. It actually allows you to use a command injection vulnerability to escalate privileges from an editor role, which is going to be a lot more common to be discovered. So if you get the creds to an editor role, you could then potentially move to an owner role, and then from an owner role, you can do full remote code execution and data extraction against
Production
the
server.
GitHub Enterprise production server. Now, take a step back from all of that. I do want to make note of a couple of key things here. First off, this was discovered and reported through their bug bounty program, which leads GitHub to have some confidence that it's not actually being exposed in the wild or used by any malicious parties. And so this was through a responsible disclosure program. The other key detail here is that if you're utilizing github.com, it's already been handled for you.
Right.
Keys have been rotated back in December, and no action from the customer is required. Although, if you are using some of GitHub's other key signing components, such as GitHub Actions, Code Spaces, and Dependabot, you will have to import the new public keys, which it'll let you know these new public keys are required.
Right.
But that's kind of the key detail, is that high confidence implies the uniqueness of the issue, and that from their logging they cannot find that it has been previously exploited. It's just been reported, addressed, and fixed very quickly.
Yeah. Extremely quickly. And it is interesting that, this article on Bleeping Computer, right, is very focused on GitHub rotating keys for this particular credential exposing flaw, which, like you said, they have assessed with very high confidence has not been exploited already in the wild. It was just discovered in December, and they've already taken care of it. But the small line of this article, buried towards the bottom of it, is the fact that this other vulnerability was also patched, the one that would allow someone with editor access on a user account to escalate privileges, which would then lead to potentially exploitation of this vulnerability. So the great thing here is that they have taken care of both of those vulnerabilities now. But there is no, as far as I can tell, I wasn't able to like really dig into it too far just before the show. But the CVE for privilege escalation, right? That was just published 3 days ago. So that one is also very new. But there isn't any mention in the article about whether that one might have been exploited in the wild.
I do want to make note here that there is a lesson to be learned from this in general, and I think this is something our viewers can really appreciate. That one, nobody is invincible to having their own vulnerabilities to be discovered. GitHub being a very large product and component of Microsoft these days, but GitHub has seen stuff in the past too. For instance, they accidentally leaked their private SSH key back in March of last year after it was exposed to be a public repository. Now, again, there are robots that actively scan public repositories for things that look like private keys, credentials, and session information and API tokens to be stolen immediately. And so any changes in uploads can be abused very quickly. And so GitHub went ahead and also rotated their SSH key due to this accidental leak. This isn't new in the sense of posting things in your public repository. Companies do this all the time on accident. And that's what a lot of these robots are actively looking for. And so if your organization is utilizing things like GitHub or any other SVN-based system and publishing code on a regular basis, pushing commits and things of that nature, and you accidentally push something that's considered a secret, it will be discovered automatically, and you will need to immediately, revoke, remediate, and rotate based on that. But this happens all the time. People will accidentally embed their AWS API keys, and then suddenly 100 instances are spun up being abused by malware actors. So, it happens across the board. It's just something to be aware of, just something to be cognizant of, and to make sure that you're prepared to respond accordingly when it does happen.
Right. So moving on to the next story here, because we've got, I think, 3 more that we want to cover, and we're running short,
more or less.
10 minutes here. So our next story here comes to us from the Hacker News, thehackernews.com. And it's detailing the fact that some researchers at Jamf have discovered a new backdoor hidden in pirated versions of popular software for macOS. Now, Jonathan, this is surprising to me because I don't think Macs can get malware.
No viruses ever.
No viruses ever. I'm pretty sure John Hodgman told me that a long time ago. So what's going on here is Jamf researchers at Jamf Threat Labs have been doing some digging, and they discovered that a website Mackie, I think .cn.
Don't go to it.
Don't go to it. Do not go. I'm not going to spell it out because it is spelled weird anyway. So, Mackie.cn has been hosting pirated versions of popular software that all have a similar backdoor built in to be able to gain persistent access to any Macs that they are downloaded and executed on.
Yeah. Now, many of you, if you are a Mac shop or a Mac user or a Mac administrator of the sort, may recognize Jamf. And so from their insight of what's going on a Mac these days, it has been discovered that when users are seeking out legitimate software from potentially pirated locations that host pirated versions, right? And by the way, one of the things you mentioned is that we discovered that not all of the software that was backdoored was even commercial software or cost money. Some of it was just even free tools, entirely based on the popularity of it. But if you are looking for something that costs money and you come across one of these, pirated software stores, free is not free. free always comes with some kind of cost. And in this case, this particular pirated app store was backdooring a number of different systems or a number of different pieces of software. And then once they landed on a system, they were kicking up some kind of droppers that added persistence. What was happening is files would be added across the system, including places like the temp directory, and from there users would have their operating system basically backdoored to be used for anything else, similar to like how you join a botnet unwillingly. um,
So it's
so
Yeah, so the way that it works is every time you fired up the software, the backdoor itself will be written to the temp folder, which means that it goes away every time you close the software. But since
yeah.
it's written every time that you open the software, that makes it pretty difficult, right? Because this backdoor could be launched and written to that directory, which then allows a downloader is also written to the users folder.
Mhm.
And that is permanent, right? So this suddenly gives persistent access to that machine. But even if you were to go in there and delete that folder, or something like that, or somehow handle the downloader, the next time you fire up this software, it's just going to reestablish that. So the software itself is also its own persistence mechanism. So the servers itself, the server themselves that were being communicated with this downloader are no longer accessible. It
Mhm.
is designed to write some HTTP responses to again to the temp folder, but it is noted that this could be a potential successor to the Zuru malware because it is operating very similarly. And Zuru itself, the detailed write up from Jamf, they point out that that was going after a particular piece of software. Like you said, like you mentioned earlier, some of it could be popular paid software that people are just looking to say, like, well, I only need to use this once, so why am I going to pay tons of money for it? But also stuff like Microsoft Remote Desktop Client, right? Just things that someone would be like, oh, I have to grab this if I want to, do XYZ for this customer call or something like that. And so they grab Microsoft Remote Desktop Client, similar to what was the piece of software? Was it Notepad plus plus? Or no, it was
Oh, you mean like from some of our previous stories?
some of
Uh,
our previous stories
oh,
where it was
like yeah, like the putty and things of that
yeah,
nature for
Putty,
like SSH.
yeah,
Yeah.
Putty, Notepad plus plus, like these very popular applications that
Hmm.
most people download just by Googling. They just Google the name of it
Yeah.
and then grab the first download. So yeah, very important to make sure that not only as an organization you're using legal software, but that your users know that they should not just be going and trying to source this software on their own. But let's go ahead and go to our next story. We mentioned the SEC 8K filings earlier.
Yeah.
And we are starting to see the impact of that new legislation, that new regulation that requires that organizations file these 8Ks anytime that they have a breach or a cybersecurity incident that could have
Hmm.
material impact on shareholder returns, essentially, right? So the value of the company, would this have material impact on its ability to function? So the SEC is requiring these filings now. Specifically in this case, VF Corporation, everyone's favorite brand that we all know by heart. VF Corporation has detailed in their 8K filing the impact that a December ransomware attack had on their company. Now, you may not know VF Corporation, but you definitely do know the brands that they hold within their corporate holdings. So things like Vans, Timberland, North Face, Dickies, Supreme, and a host of others. VF Corporation has said that 35 million customers had their personal information stolen in a December ransomware attack.
Yeah, and so as you mentioned, it's one of those big companies you haven't heard of. Of those 35 million individual consumers, one of the quotes is that that there is no evidence at this time that any consumer passwords were acquired by the threat, but it sounds like other customer information was taken. Now, because this is a disclosed ransomware attack, it's sounding to me like what's happening according to the filing is that it's a double extortion between the encryption of IT systems and the stolen data from the company,
Right.
most likely being used to either pull some ransom in both directions, or potentially sell it to some kind of third party on the dark web. Now, most of the systems have been restored from the encrypted incident, but they will continue to have some minor operational impacts, right? These things just don't kind of fix themselves overnight. It is generally kind of challenging when an entire system becomes functionally unusable. Now,
Right.
VF Corporation has different perspectives, and like many businesses out there today, they operate between things like storefronts and retail locations to different distributors and third parties to even e-commerce sites and different types of business to business operations. And so, you will see effects across the board. This kind of thing is starting to kind of feel almost normal these days. One of the lessons that I always continue to harp on in this show is that it is suggested to never pay those ransoms according to our United States FBI suggestions over here.
Right. Exactly. So this will actually be something that you'll see more of in the Grit report when it comes out next week,
Mhm.
talking about extortion methods, double extortion, triple extortion, the ways that ransomware is evolving. And that is going to become even more important as these regulations, like the requirement to file 8Ks anytime you have a cybersecurity incident like this. Those extortion methods are just growing over time, to the extent that even recently we were talking about the ransomware gang. I think it was Alpha.
Yeah.
I believe it was Alpha that did this, but they reported a company that they had breached to the SEC for not filing an 8K, even though they weren't legally required to yet. It's kind of a shot across the bow, right? To say like, hey, we can now use this as an extortion method. So very interesting stuff there. Luckily, according to VF Corporation, like you said, no evidence that passwords were accessed or stolen. And also they say customer social security numbers, bank account information, and payment card information was not affected because they don't store that stuff
Yeah.
on their systems. So we have
Nice.
one final story. We always try and find something. Sometimes we can't, but we try and find something that'll end us on a bit of a high note. So, Jonathan, what do we have as our good news of the day?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to throw this in as a last couple minute good news, but a 29-year-old crypto jacking kingpin was arrested for exploiting cloud services. And what crypto jacking is the idea of stealing and utilizing resources of a victim, whether it's a business or an individual, and essentially mining cryptocurrency on those resources. Think things like breaking into your AWS and spinning up a bunch of instances. I mentioned this earlier in the show. In fact, one of the quotes coming to us from the article is that crypto jackers today can find an AWS credential in a GitHub repository within 5 minutes of its public disclosure. And within those 5 minutes, already start spinning up instances to mine cryptocurrency. Now, this particular individual was arrested out of Ukraine. And what he was doing was targeting American companies and using a variety of ways of breaking in, including brute forcing accounts to access these different firms. And then once he gained access to the management of some of their infrastructure, immediately began spinning up millions, more than a million of virtual computers utilizing their paid infrastructure. And so, you know, having ways to keep an eye on this, because what happens is if you break into somebody's AWS infrastructure and spin up a million instances, that's a big bill, and
Yeah.
that falls on the victim, and then the outcome of the compute effort in the cryptocurrency that's still that's mined and pilfered is essentially just stolen by the threat actor. So it's a direct correlation between a financial cost to both the cloud infrastructure and the victim, and a financial gain using oftentimes more sophisticated and untraceable cryptocurrencies like Monero
Right.
to profit from. So one more person has been arrested, and their operations have been shut down.
And we're right at the top of the hour, but I do want to say this is important. This is something I feel like maybe should have been earlier, actually, because it is such an important thing to keep an eye on. Is the fact that the Bitcoin halving, the halving is coming.
Happening.
Yeah, the halvening is coming here very quickly, which is going to drive the value of Bitcoin even higher potentially. So
Are you speculating?
I might be. I potentially it will drive it higher. Historically, that has been the case every time this happens. Every 4 years, the return that you get from mining Bitcoin is cut in half, which tends to typically drive the price even higher. And with that, that just generally tends to take the crypto market and kind of like rising tide floats all boats. For a lot of it. So if crypto mining is something that you are worried about, there's a good chance that that people are trying to get in and exploit that even more actively right now before that halving occurs. So with that though, we are going to go ahead and end the show. Thank you so much for joining us for GPS Live for the week of January 19th. Again, if you've been here on demand, thank you so much for watching and giving us some of your time. If you've been here live, thank you. And if you have any comments or ideas for stories you'd like to talk about in the future, go ahead and leave those comments, and we will take a look and we will see if those are things that we can slide into the show. But until next week, I've been Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we will see you all next time.